On this episode of Base Hunters, we are dragging Fall under the LFE microscope. This is a crazy movie. If you haven't seen it, heed that warning. Spoiler alerts. I don't want to ruin this one for you. Stick around. Fellow baseheads, my name is Todd, editor at avnirvana.com, and you are watching Base Hunters episode number 9. Today we are checking out a crazy movie called Fall. If you have any fear of heights, of falling to your death, of being trapped, this movie is probably going to suck you in just like it sucked me and my family in. It's a fun little thrill ride. Before we kick things off today, I want to give a shout out to our great friends and our partner over at Kaleidoscape. This movie is currently only available on the market as a Blu-ray disc, but through Kaleidoscape, you can download it in full lossless 4K HDR. You can see right there, it has a 53.6 gig file size, and this is just another reason why having access to Kaleidoscape's disc quality or better movie library is really cool, because you get films like this that aren't available on the market in 4K in your home theater room. So let's not waste any time and let's get the scorecard up on your screen. And you can see right there, I'm giving this movie a B. This movie is a lot of fun. I've seen it 3 times now in a period of about 2 weeks. It has good replayability. And I watched it the first time alone, then I went back through for Base Hunters and really dissected what was going on the audio front. Then I decided to drag my family into it. And as I mentioned before, if you have a fear of being trapped or a fear of heights and falling to your death, any one of those things, this movie is going to lock you in to its grips and take you on a great ride. Moving along to picture quality, A-. It's a great looking film, lots of detail in the 4K transfer. Now, my good buddy Steve George over in the UK had mentioned that the Blu-ray disc shows some signs of banding. I didn't see that in my first and second watches through this movie, but I just saw this the other night, and I did in maybe 2 or 3 shots see some minor evidence of banding and some sky scenes. Just because I did see that, I am knocking it down a notch, but overall, image quality on this movie is quite good. Same thing goes along with the audio. Both the Blu-ray disc and the 4K HDR version of the film come with a lossless DTS HD MA 5.1 surround sound experience. This is a movie that really just kind of engulfs the room with the sound of wind whipping around and things like that. It's not going to blow your system up and just have you on the floor going, wow, this is incredible, but it does enough to get the job done and really kind of isolate you on this giant tower that most of the movie takes place on. So A-, it's a solid effort, and this movie is going to play very well to a wide range of systems. You don't have to have a crazy Atmos setup to really make it sing, although I will say it does upconvert quite well with Auro 3D. So keep that in the back of your mind when you go to watch this film. You can upconvert it and get a little bit more of that dome sound effect to really draw you in to the film. Now that brings us to the bass. This movie does a lot with bass in a very subtle fashion. So let's just take a quick peek at our old friend, the spectrogram. Now this is a 20-second snapshot of a period in the movie. Time is down here in the bottom and it's moving in this direction, but this is just a picture still. Nothing is going to be moving right now. Over here on the left-hand side, we have frequency, and down here, this is 20 hertz. You can hear most things 20 hertz and above all the way up to about 20 kilohertz, but in all actuality, your hearing is really dropping off right around somewhere in this range, depending on what your age is. And then down below here are the infrasonics, and you can hear some things down here, but it's mostly felt. And then what you see over here is a measurement of decibels or sound intensity. So this is what we're seeing in this particular scene, are 2 Main characters are at the base of this giant tower that, spoiler alert, they are climbing. And what you're seeing in here is bass. So that's probably in the mid 60s. I mean, you're kind of getting up towards 70. This is in the solid 50 hertz range. And then we have smatterings that are going, down in the 20 hertz. You see it's bleeding down in the 20s, but a lot of in the 40s and 50s. And this is just added texture to the sound of wind that is whipping around the soundstage. And you can see there, it just adds a little bit of feeling to the scene. And this is indicative of what a lot of the bass deployment throughout this movie is. It is atmospherics, adding to the texture and the breadth of the moment. But that isn't to say that there aren't a few bass moments in this movie that hit home oh so well. And here's a look at our top 3 featured scenes for this episode of Bass Hunters. There's actually 5 in the Kaleidoscape script file down in the description below. So if you own this movie on your Kaleidoscape server, just download that file and you can watch these right out of the scenes feature on Kaleidoscape. Otherwise, there are timestamps right there on your screen. You can write those down and follow along on a disc. Okay, first up, we have a short clip right from the beginning of the movie, and this is probably the deepest and most powerful bass of the entire show. They're elongated bass notes that are related to the score, and as you're about to see, they pick up in intensity, just kind of injecting that sense of fear and terror into the beginning of this flick. Check it out.
Taking your time there, Hotshot.
Okay, so you can see that's some very powerful bass right there. Please be careful with your subs at home. A couple of those elongated notes are hitting in the 20s, kind of mid to upper 20s, but lots of good stuff to look at. We're actually going to pull out the FFT analyzer so you can get a sense of where the power is centered. Up here on top is our FFT analyzer, and this right here is 50 hertz. So right around in that range. Down here, this is obviously 20, then we have 30 and 40. Over here, this is a measure of energy. Check it out as we replay this scene, and you'll get a sense of how the power builds in these bass notes.
Taking your time there, Hotshot.
And that's just some really meaty bass. It feels good. I mean, it definitely creates a sensation in your body, this sense of fear, and a little bit of grandeur to the moment. You can see they're scaling a giant wall there. It's excellent bass. So your results at home may vary. Remember, these are in-room measurements using my equipment and my home theater. So depending on what kind of subwoofer system you have and what kind of home theater setup you have, your results may vary. It might be better, might be worse, but this gives you a really solid idea of what the film has to offer. Okay, moving along, we're about 40 minutes into the movie now. Again, spoiler alerts. If you haven't seen this, hit stop, go watch this movie, then come back. But in this particular scene, you're going to get a great idea of how the sound designers deployed bass to inject fear during a real emergency situation. Have a watch. Okay, so you can see emergency situation with a capital E, and it really punches right away in the beginning when probably the most terrifying part of that entire sequence is taking place as she is falling with the ladder, holding on to the ladder for her dear life, and then having her rope snapped tight to her friend, keeping her from plunging all the way down to the earth. This is a great sound design moment where the sound design team used LFE to just inject that punch of terror and this emergent feeling that something bad is really happening. It's great stuff. Okay, and now we find ourselves at our very last scene for today's episode, and this particular scene is an end cap. It's kind of like the final nail in the coffin for all that dread and terror that you've been experiencing throughout this movie. It has some of that fear base that's whipped into a storm that is arriving. It's great stuff. Let's check it out and then we'll break it down.
You didn't really think your scrawny ass could pull me out, did you? You pulled the bag up. I guess you were just too afraid to realize that you were up here. All alone.
Okay, so very dramatic ending with that added layer of bass in the very beginning. You can see it's not that much different than what we saw at the beginning of the movie, just a little less intense. Here you can see it right there. You have multiple layers of bass going on. And then as we fast forward to the end, when the storm arrives, I think arguably this is the area where we see the deepest bass. You can see a little bit of yellow stretching down into the low 20s, maybe into the infrasonics a little bit right there. Nothing too deep and powerful, but it definitely punches and gives that storm a lot of ferocity. So the question is, what kind of subsystem plays well for this movie? Obviously, if you have an array of sonic cannons going on in your home theater room, you're going to be left with quite a bit right here, as you can see, especially in the very beginning of the movie. And throughout the movie, you're gonna get those little nuanced hits of wind and bass that's wrapped into the wind. Of course, you can see that most of this movie is not a real heavy hitter. So systems with smaller subs, maybe single sub deployments, and even soundbars with a decent sub, you're going to have a very nice experience. Of course, since this is not an Atmos film, you don't need an Atmos array to get the full feeling and full force of what the sound design has to offer. All right, folks, that's all I have for you today. We are quickly approaching the end of the year. We have one more episode that we're going to squeeze off, and that is Barbarian. Unfortunately, we're not going to get to Bullet Train this year. Hopefully, that's going to happen after CES. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. If you'd like to find me, you can always get a hold of me over on Twitter. My handle there is @AVWolfer. And of course, you can always track me down at the forum that is avnirvana.com. My username there is my name. That's Todd Anderson. We'll see you soon.